I absolutely love PC handhelds. They are probably some of the most versatile devices out there, especially the Steam Deck, where you can load a custom version of Batocera onto it. There's things like EmuDeck that's finally available for more than just the Steam Deck. But I very rarely recommend a PC handheld for a dedicated emulation device, for the main reason that they tend to be really expensive for that reason. You can buy a handheld for like $200 that is capable of doing pretty high-end emulation. A great example is the recent release of the Retroid Pocket 5. That device is capable of going well past GameCube and PS2 emulation, handles Nintendo Switch emulation, and all that stuff, the highest stuff you can do on Android. And that's realistically what most people want. A PC handheld can do so much more, but I don't really see that as a bonus, especially when it comes to emulation. If you're buying a dedicated emulation device, you could be better served by many other devices, because the nature of PC handhelds, excluding the Steam Deck, is that they're not really that user-friendly. Most of them run Windows, and that can be a kind of an annoying thing to deal with. Just overall, the less user-friendliness of just the user interface, and the overall more complicated nature of setting up emulators. So as a general purpose emulation device, I don't necessarily ever recommend PC handhelds for that reason, and I always tend to recommend things that run Android, because even the Linux-based operating systems on the ultra-cheap devices can be kind of annoying to navigate. And the stuff that's based on Android has the benefit of Android being a standard phone operating system, so the vast majority of people out there might have some level of experience with it. But I've been told that some people like having a PC handheld, especially for higher end emulation. Think PS3 and Xbox 360 era emulation. That is not currently possible on Android devices. And sometimes most of these devices aren't necessarily capable of ultra high resolutions, and they tend to max out at 2 to 4x resolution. But most PC handhelds can go well in excess of 4. So a lot of people choose PC handhelds not necessarily because they can emulate more systems, but because they can emulate their favorite systems at a way higher quality than what you could possibly get on a traditional Android-based emulation device. So that got me wondering, what are some of the best choices for a PC handheld as a dedicated emulation device? Not counting that technically all these devices can play PC games, but most of them will not be capable of playing most modern titles at this point. This leads me into my first device that I thought you might want to take a look at. And I put it here first because it is the one that is the least likely to be in stock, because I've seen this thing in stock only a few times, and I do not know if it's going to come back in stock. But it's important to keep in mind if you find a used one, and that is the AYANEO AIR Plus AMD Mendocino 7320U. Very long and not fun name, but this is basically your standard AYANEO AIR Plus that just runs a AMD 7th generation Ryzen 3 with either 8 or 16 gigabytes of RAM and 128 and 512 gigabytes of memory accordingly. So basically it is a pretty low-end PC handheld, and this is an incredibly great value if you're looking at PC emulation, especially because this device can be had assuming you get the 8GB model, which you should be fine, especially if you're doing some pretty normal level amounts of emulation. I'm not talking about like 4x PS3, but this should be able to handle pretty much all your GameCube, PS2, and original PS3 at like native resolution quality. And that you can get that for about $270, cheaper than a Steam Deck by a large margin. And this should be plenty powerful enough to handle all your emulation needs. Though, like I said, stock is all over the place. I can't say for certain you'd actually be able to order one of these things right now. But if you can get your hands on one of these things with an AMD Ryzen 3 7320U, this thing is pretty powerful. It has the standard AMD graphics that we've all gotten used to by this point, but with a lower 4-core processor, you're not necessarily going to get the best out of it. And considering that it's a substantially lower wattage, you also might not be getting the best performance, but you would be getting a pretty decent amount of battery life. With that Ryzen 3, you are more than capable of pretty much all your emulation needs, all up until the PS3 generation. and it's a great experience. And you can also install Halo OS or Batocera on some of these handhelds in the first place. Some other Linux-based operating systems on top of that to help increase overall performance. And with EmuDeck making its way to other devices and being generally available on Windows, that should help expedite an ease of use of setting up emulators on this device. And so overall, this is a tremendous value, and it uses that standard AYANEO sort of stick and button layout, their usual sort of buttons and whatnot, so pretty standard fare. And for what it's worth, it's a decent value, just unfortunate that stock is inconsistent. So I would recommend this device, but with those stock issues, I would have to say try to find one on the used market, or just you have to wait a while for this thing to pop up as in stock. This next device is the much maligned on this channel. I do not really like this device because of it's being posed and positioned for a dedicated PC handheld, much like the Steam Deck, capable of playing high-end PC games at like 720p quality. And that's just simply not possible on this device. The AYANEO NEXT Lite is an amazing looking device. AYANEO is always killer when it comes to their industrial design, but it's simply just poorly spec'd. And you can get this thing with a Ryzen 5 4500U or a Ryzen 7 4800U with 16 gigabytes of RAM on both models, or with 120 gigabytes of memory in first one and 512 gigabytes in the other model. And it only comes in one color, Starry Black. It used to come in others, but at the moment they seem to only carry Starry Black. And with this spec layout, it is capable of decent amount of emulation, being not necessarily on par with the 7320U found in the previous device, but with a higher core count, it sort of evens out, because this is based on an older AMD architecture, released originally all the way back in 2020. So for PC gaming, think of Rainbow Six Siege, Call of Duty. This thing is aged like milk. But for emulation, it hasn't really changed. It is still fairly decent at emulation, and being capable of the same stuff that the previous device mentioned is capable of. But the difference is that this one is much more available and at a larger size on top of that. This is a 7-inch screen instead of the 6-inch screen found on the AYANEO AIR Plus. And having a larger screen isn't necessarily just, oh, it's nice that it's bigger. It also just helps having some of those games, especially like PS3 games, if you decide to go down that route for emulation, to have more space for the UI elements. Sometimes on these smaller devices, and with all the screen elements all there for the UI, it just gets a little cramped and a little hard to understand or see everything that you're supposed to be able to see normally on a full-size TV. For the AYANEO NEXT Lite, you can get it at a starting price of $300, which is a great price, but pushes it in terms of its performance into the realm of being compared to the Steam Deck. And while the Steam Deck isn't the number one most powerful device on the market right now anymore, it's still significantly more powerful than the AYANEO NEXT Lite. And for an extra $50 to get the Steam Deck, you would have a much better time with the Steam Deck than you would with this device, unless you particularly like having Windows natively instead of having to modify your Steam Deck to have it in the first place. Which, on that topic, I've made multiple videos in how Windows on Steam Deck can be amazing, and with the recent release of Windows drivers for the OLED, it's become even better. Though some of the drivers do have some problems, like audio and Bluetooth isn't exactly working on the OLED quite yet, but hopefully they get that fixed. The next device I'm going to be talking about, you probably guessed it, the Steam Deck, and I've talked about the Steam Deck a lot. I love the Steam Deck to bits, and for emulation, the Steam Deck makes the most compelling case, especially thanks to things like EmuDeck hooking into SteamOS so seamlessly and simply, making the whole setting up the device for emulation so much easier than it would be using EmuDeck on other Windows-based PC handhelds. On top of that, the Steam Deck is also just the easiest to get your hands on. You can just go through Steam, or you can even buy it on Amazon. Granted, you could also get AYANEO's devices on Amazon sometimes, but in my experience, they tend to be marked up quite a bit if you go down that route. Steam Deck is the simplest and easiest solution for a lot of people, especially if you want it for specifically emulation. The Steam Deck is uniquely decent for that option, though, like I said, I don't tend to recommend PC handhelds for these purposes because it just seems a little extreme. But there are cases out there, like if you want to do high-end emulation that simply is not possible on the current landscape for Android handhelds, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you like PS3 emulation. There is no PS3 emulator for Android, and there's no way to get that done portably outside of these PC handhelds or a gaming laptop, which might not be practical either. And of course, for the best gaming experience, you could get something like the ROG Ally X. But that sort of starts to defeat the purpose. You're buying that device for PC gaming first and foremost, and then also doing emulation. I'm talking about buying a PC handhelds for specifically emulation, which in the grand scheme of things, it has quite the low bar for performance needed to get it done well in comparison to playing Cyberpunk or something like that. So I would love to hear what you guys think. Do any of these devices catch your fancy? What PC handheld would you recommend for a dedicated emulation device? I would love to hear what you guys think down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. All the other social media garbage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.